If you're visiting England this year, make sure you watch this video because I'm sharing all sorts of tips and must-knows that you have to keep in mind before your big trip. Hi, I'm Christina from happytowander.com, and I've spent the past decade traveling extensively around England, but yeah, there's a lot of information, so let's get right into it. Let's start with England travel planning. So the first thing I want you to know is that England encompasses so much more than just London. I know that London is one of the most visited cities in the world, and if it's your first time in England, you're probably gonna end up in London, but don't forget that there's a ton of different really amazing destinations scattered all around the country. For example, the South Coast is amazing with its beaches and coastline. There's a lot of really cool cities up north, like Liverpool is one of my personal favorites. There's the Lake District, the Peak District, the villages of the Cotswolds. There's really amazing places scattered all throughout the country. So I highly recommend spicing up your itinerary with a few more off the beaten path places that you might have not heard of. Now, in terms of booking places to stay, first of all, if you're looking for a budget-friendly chain that's very reliable and you can find in every city, look into Premier Inn. It's definitely quite no frills, but it's one of the most reliable budget-friendly options that you'll find in England. And it's important that I tell you about it because they actually don't have any presence on third-party websites, so the only way to book with Premier Inn is directly through their website. Another really great budget-friendly option is pubs. So I think a lot of visitors who come to England for the first time are really surprised to see that pubs are not just places to drink, they're also places that you can stay. It's not at all uncommon to have pubs that have rooms upstairs or on the property, so if you're looking for a budget-friendly and kind of unique place to stay, definitely don't rule out pubs. Another tip to keep in mind before you leave is to have a really good credit card. So increasingly, places around the UK are turning into card-only establishments. There have been quite a few instances when I've noticed that places are card-only these days, so cash is no longer king in the UK. Make sure you have a credit card that you can bring abroad that hopefully minimizes fees. If you don't have one yet, I can highly recommend getting a Wise card, which allows you to hold multiple currencies in one account, and it also doesn't have any international usage fees. And depending on where you're from, you can actually get the card for free. So definitely look into that. I'll leave a link for that down in the description below. All right, now let's tackle some culture and etiquette tips for England. So the first one is to know the difference between England, Great Britain, and the UK. A lot of the time people use these terms interchangeably, but they're not all the same. So basically you can look at the UK as an umbrella term that includes England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Great Britain refers to just this island here, this piece of land, which of course includes England, Scotland, and Wales. And then of course England is just this specific part of Great Britain, this country, and that's the part that this video is all about. Culturally, all these countries have quite different identities, so don't get confused and don't go like walking around England asking people where their kilts are because it's different. Similarly, there's a lot of variations in accents that I think a lot of visitors from abroad don't realize exists. So for us in North America, oftentimes we'll call it just like a British accent, and it's just the accent that we hear in all our period dramas. But when you actually arrive in England, depending on the parts that you're visiting, you'll find that accents can vary so much, and you might not be able to understand what people are saying. So just keep that in mind, that there's a lot of regional variation with accents, and not everyone is gonna sound like Downton Abbey when you get there. Now let's go through some common word differences. I think we all know by now that North American English and British English can be quite different, not just in terms of the accent, but also in the words that we use. So here are just a few that you might encounter during your trip. It's not bathroom or washroom, it's the loo or the toilet. It's not an elevator, it's the lift. It's not a trunk of a car, it's the boot of a car. It's not a line, it's a queue. It's not sidewalk, it's pavement. It's not gas, it's petrol. And maybe most importantly, it's not soccer, it's football. Another term to look out for is quid. This basically just means pound, but they'll use it in more casual settings. So if someone says, oh, it's gonna be 5 quid, that means it's gonna be 5 pounds. Now, if you're ever struggling for small talk, just know that the weather is the topic of the day in England always. So if you're in a customer service setting, you're not sure what to say, always comment on the weather. That is a sure bet. And when you're conducting this small talk, make sure you keep your voice down. I think a very common and fair stereotype is that North Americans can be incredibly loud compared to their British counterparts. So just keep your voice down because you don't want to be obnoxious and rude. You should also be aware of the fact that a lot of places in England aren't pronounced like they're spelled, and it can make things confusing and awkward if you're asking for directions. So here are just a few rules to keep in mind. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but hopefully it'll help you avoid some of the common mispronunciation fails that North Americans often encounter. So first of all, if there's a place name that ends in HAM, the H is almost always silent, and it's more like an sound rather than a ham sound. So it's Buckingham Palace, not Buckingham Palace. And if there's a place that ends in SHIRE, it's almost never Shire, like in Lord of the Rings. It's almost always Shire. So oftentimes this will be counties. A lot of counties end in Shire. So Hampshire, it's not Hampshire, it's Hampshire. And if you see a W in the middle of a name, oftentimes that W is silent. So it's not Norwich, it's Norwich. And if a place ends in MOUTH, it's never pronounced mouth, it's pronounced myth. So with Bournemouth, for instance, it's not Bournemouth, it's Bournemouth. Same with Portsmouth, it's not Portsmouth. Yeah. Lastly, one of the trickiest ones, if you ever see a name that ends in C-E-S-T-E-R, just know it's not going to be pronounced like how you think it will be pronounced. It's almost always something shorter. So it's Bister, not Bicester. It's Leicester, not Leicester. And it's Worcester, not Worcester. Combining all these tips, now you'll see why it's pronounced Worcestershire sauce and not Worcestershire sauce. All right, so with all the pronunciation stuff out of the way, another important cultural etiquette tip to keep in mind is that you should definitely get into England's queuing culture. So queuing, as you'll recall, means lining up, and Brits queue for everything. So make sure you're never jumping in line, because that is a surefire recipe for, well, they don't really like confrontation either, so they'll probably just like side eye you and kind of tut, but you know, it's still kind of scary. Also make sure you're always standing on the right side of escalators, because the left side is reserved for people who are walking up. So make sure you're not that annoying person who's standing on the left side. In terms of tipping is definitely not as big in England as it is in North America. Usually you'll tip about 10% for excellent service, but the thing to keep in mind is these days they're increasingly starting to add something called a discretionary service charge onto your bill. So if you ever see that on your bill, just know that it's not a mandatory charge. If you feel like the service there wasn't worth the 12.5% or the 10%, whatever it may be, then you can actually ask them to take it off. Lastly, if someone in England asks you if you're all right or if you're okay, they're not sensing that you're in trouble. It's literally just a greeting. It's kind of like, hey, what's up? Now let's chat about England transport and getting around. First off, depending on where you're going, I wouldn't necessarily advise renting a car, because as you know, driving on the left side of the road, if you're new to it, can be quite a daunting task for newbies, and also it can be quite an expensive way to travel around the country. The only exception to this, I would say, is if you're visiting lots of small villages or you're looking to visit places that are more remote, maybe some nature spots. In that case, having a car can be really helpful. But if you're just traveling from city to city, you really don't need to rent a car. And a really good alternative also is to just base yourself in a city and maybe book a day trip with a company that'll take you to some of the more remote places. Now, a common way to get around England is by train. And if you want a full guide on how to take the train in England, I can make a separate video. Just let me know in the comments. But here's a quick overview. So generally speaking, there's about 24 different train companies that operate in the UK. But practically speaking, most of them operate under an umbrella term known as National Rail. So if you're looking at signs and stuff, often it'll say National Rail. But when you're looking at individual train names, you'll see South Western Railway or Avanti West Coast. So just keep that in mind. There's never a train that'll be like National Rail number 2001. It's always the name of the company. But one app I really love to use is Trainline. You can just enter your destination and your departure point, and then it'll show you all the different options. That way you don't have to worry about looking on the individual websites of all these different train companies. You can just search them all at once. And I do believe they take a small service fee, but to me it's worth it just because you can keep all your tickets in one place. But if you want to save some money, you can easily just use Trainline to search things up and then book directly on that specific train company's website. Now, usually when it comes to train tickets, it's best to just buy your tickets as far in advance as possible. But if you do need that flexibility and spontaneity, one thing I can highly recommend is buying a BritRail pass. So this is basically a train pass that gives you unlimited access to trains for an entire day. They have a few different train passes available. Some of them are for a consecutive period. So let's say like 7 days in a row, or you can buy ones that are 5 days in a 30-day period, something like that. And this can be really handy if you don't really know the departure dates or you want more flexibility to be able to take any train during that day. I can highly recommend it. And specifically the one I really like is the BritRail London Plus Pass, which encompasses this entire network. And it's basically London and every day trip you could possibly want to do from London. And I've used that twice before. And it's just a really great way to have spontaneous day trips and just to have a bit more flexibility. And it can save you a lot of money because trains in the UK are incredibly expensive. One thing to keep in mind though is that you should always be holding onto your ticket, whether it's on your phone or you have a physical one. And that's just because even if you scan your ticket on the way in, sometimes there will be a ticket controller on board who asks to see your ticket again. And also most of the time for bigger stations, you do have to scan the ticket on your way out. And this applies for underground trains like the Tube in London as well. So you'll often see tourists who are really confused because they've forgotten where their ticket is or they don't know where their Oyster card is. So just keep in mind in bigger cities and bigger stations, you often need to tap on your way out as well. So don't lose your ticket. Another way you can save money on trains in England is by looking into buying a rail card. So if you're between the ages of 16 to 30 and 60 plus, you're eligible to buy something called a rail card, which is basically a card that you buy for a set price. And then for that entire year, you get 1/3 off of all your train travel in the UK. And if you tie it to your Oyster card as well, then you also save 1/3 on all your Tube journeys. And so, okay, you might be thinking this is only worth it if you're in England for like a longer period of time. But to be honest, train travel in the UK can be so expensive that sometimes if you save 1/3 on one expensive train journey, that already pays for the rail card because it's usually only 20 or 30 pounds. So keep that in mind, look into whether you're eligible and see if that makes sense for you, because I have saved so much money using my rail card and and I feel like I got the value back within like 1 or 2 trips already. Now, as much as I love train travel, I do have to admit in the UK there's often delays, but a really good thing to know is that if your train in the UK is delayed by more than 15 minutes, most train companies actually offer something called delay repay, which means that you get some kind of compensation back if your train is delayed. For most of them, if your train is arriving like an hour late, you can actually get your entire fare back, which is really handy. And the best part about it is you can do all your claims online and it's super simple. So be sure to keep that in mind if you're ever in a situation where your train is delayed by 15 minutes or more, you might be entitled to compensation. Now, besides trains, another really common way to get around the country is buses, or as they're known in the UK, coaches. So 2 big companies to look out for are Megabus and National Express. And both of these have really cheap fares, so you can get from one city to another for like £10, and it's way more affordable than the train most of the time, although it does come with its own set of troubles, like potentially traffic, and it's not as comfortable as the train, but if you're on a budget, it's a really, really great way to get around. One super easy way to compare all these different options, of course, is by using a service like Omio, which shows you all the buses, all the trains, all the flights, and that way you can kind of compare. Now let's move on to a few quick packing tips. So the first one is you will need an adapter in the UK if you're coming from abroad, and that's because the outlets look like this, so I would recommend getting a universal adapter. That way you don't have to worry, and then in the future you can just use it for all your different trips. In terms of what to wear, I know you want to look cute on your little England trip, but a very important thing to bring is a rainproof and windproof jacket, preferably with a hood. And I say this is actually more important than bringing an umbrella, just because depending on where you're going, the wind can be absolutely insane as well. So I just recommend having a waterproof, windproof coat with a hood, and that way you save your umbrellas from flipping inside out. Now let's tackle some final tips when you actually get to England. So the first one is to be really careful when you're crossing the street. So if you're from a country like mine where we don't drive on the left, you can honestly get run over very easily when you go to England because your body is just so used to turning a certain way to check when you go. So look both ways, and when in doubt, look on the ground because they often have little signs that say, okay, look to the left or look to the right or look both ways. Now, another tip is to give English food a fair chance. So I don't know where the stereotype came from, but a lot of people seem to think that English food is just like the most disgusting thing on earth, but it's not. It's actually really good, especially if you like hearty comfort food. English food is the best. So I implore you to actually give it a try and kind of disregard those negative stereotypes because there are a lot of really tasty English dishes. And if you want a full list, I do have one on my website, but just generally speaking, a few must-tries. You have to have a full English breakfast. It's just non-negotiable. If you can get a Sunday roast, it's like Thanksgiving dinner, but like better somehow. Fish and chips, hopefully by a coastal destination. Don't just go looking for fish and chips anywhere because I don't know, it just tastes better when you're by the sea, honestly. Pie, not sweet pie, but like savory meat pies are so good, as are sausage rolls, bangers and mash. It's like mashed potato with sausages and like a sweet onion gravy. Also pasties. Pasties are one of my favorite things ever. They're basically just these pastry pockets that are filled with steak and potato, and it's so yummy. Also shepherd's pie or cottage pie. It's like a meat pie that's mashed potato on top. And last thing is sticky toffee pudding. It's just the most beautiful dessert in the history of desserts. Another thing to keep in mind when you're in England is to try out a lot of different international cuisines as well. So make sure you add that to your itineraries and don't just stick to the English classics, no matter how good they are. All that said, dining out in England can be really expensive, but there are some tricks that you can use to really cut costs down. The first one is buying something called a meal deal. To me, this is one of the most beautiful inventions in the history of the planet, and it's basically something that a lot of different chains in England do, where you can get a main, so like a sandwich or something, plus a snack, plus a drink for a set price that's usually like £4 or £5. Back in the day, it used to be like £3, but this is still one of the most budget-friendly and quick ways to get a really filling meal in when you're sightseeing or just in the evenings when you're not feeling too fussed about going to a restaurant to eat. And lastly, if you're looking for a very cheap place for a sit-down meal with drinks, there is a chain of pubs known as Wetherspoon, or Spoons for short, and it is kind of a controversial chain for a lot of different reasons, but what you do need to know is that their prices are unbeatable. Everything there is incredibly cheap, and it is not the best food in the world, obviously, but if you're looking for a cheap place to get some drinks, to get some food, this is where to save money. Now, safety-wise, I'd say be sure to keep your phone really close. Pickpockets are not as much of a threat in England as they are in some other European countries, but the main threat right now, especially in big cities, is phone snatchers. So you hear stories every day of people getting their phones stolen by cyclists or people on scooters when they're just using their phone out in public. So definitely try not to keep your phone out and easily grabbable, especially if you're next to the road. Now, in terms of attractions, I do find that most of the best things to do in England are free. So you don't have to worry about paying to see a lot of attractions because some of the best walking walks are free, most churches are free, etc. But if you are planning on doing a lot of sightseeing in a major city with lots of attractions like in London, one thing worth looking into is getting a paid attractions pass. So these are passes that you can buy that give you unlimited access to a bunch of different attractions within the city for one set price. And so if you're planning on going to a lot of different attractions, this can actually save you a ton of money, but be sure to crunch the numbers on it because it's not always going to save you money. It just depends on how many sites you're planning on seeing. Of course, if you're planning a longer stay in England, there's a few different passes that you can look into as well. So there's the National Trust and there's also English Heritage. So both of these are organizations that oversee hundreds of different tourist attractions, historical attractions across the country. And so you pay for a membership for a year and it gives you unlimited access to all these different attractions. Again, this only really makes sense if you're planning a longer trip or if you're planning to be in England a bit longer term, but it is still a great way to save money on attractions if you plan to visit a bunch of them because they are really expensive to visit on their own. And as a last random cultural note, if you're taking the bus in England, make sure you flag the driver down if you see your bus coming. I didn't realize this for the longest time because in Canada where I'm from, you don't have to flag the driver down, they'll just stop at the bus no matter what. But in England, that's not the case. So if you see your bus coming, make sure to give them a little wave and only then will they stop. All right, I hope this list of England travel tips was helpful. Be sure to let me know in the comments if you have any more questions. And if you like practical travel videos just like this one, be sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.